Okay, let's continue. Any questions so far? No? Okay, good. Okay, we have just talked about ordinances, right? I showed you some examples, right? You will see many more examples in the coming lectures. And Basic Law Article 73 also states that it delegates its law of making authority, usually to members of executive branches of the government. That means, for example, those government departments. As I said, say, for example, buildings department is one government department. EMSD, Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, is another one, right? So these are some branches of the government departments. So delegates this law-making authority to these departments, fill in the provisions of the ordinances with details. So how to fill, or what details are to be filled. So these delegates will make rules, regulations, or bylaws, referred to as subordinate, delegated, or subsidiary legislations. So basically, they are talking about the same thing, referring to the same thing. Regulations, I think this is a more easy to understand example. Like this is the Chinese version. So this is the main ordinance, right? Chapter 1, 2, 3. And then you can also click this tab, subsidiary legislation. So subsidiary legislations, for example, regulations. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. So these are called regulations. Sons and daughters. The mother or the father is ordinance. Okay? So subsidiary legislations, example, regulations, which are confined to the judicial territory within which their respective parent ordinance. The example I've just quoted is chapter 1, 2, 3, parents. The building's ordinance as the parents. Okay, power to interpret law. Who has the power to interpret law? NPC, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China, or the Hong Kong courts as authorized by the Standing Committee of the NPC. So sometimes the courts authorized by the NPC could also has the power to interpret law. And who has the power to amend law? Amend, make changes. Okay, is vested in the NPC. Okay, National People Congress. So these are all defined in the basic law. Say, for example, Article 158, Article 159. So this diagram shows you, depicts the overall hierarchy of the statutory requirements in Hong Kong. So we may regard at the top ordinance, the mother or the father, okay? Under which we have regulations, rules, bylaws. These are subsidiary legislation, okay? Then we also could have some orders, improvement notices, or directions. These are issued by some government departments as and when required. One example is, say, if the buildings department finds that there's something danger with your building, then the buildings department will issue a statutory order requiring you to investigate the problem, remove the danger, something like that. Okay? So that kind of statutory order is also a statutory requirement. Right? Then code of practice is at the bottom. Why? And it seems to be very wide at the base. What are codes of practice? For example, we have this code of practice for the electricity wiring regulations. So we have this wiring regulation. But the wiring regulations would just lay down some key principles. For some technical details are usually stated in this code of practice. All right? Then the question is, now this is something very important. Recently, the big fire case, right? Of course, we have some relevant regulations. We also have some relevant code of practice. Okay. Usually, requirements stated in the regulations are mandatory. It's a must to comply with. But how about those stated in the code of practice, COP? This is code of practice, not cook of practice, okay? We are not cooking practice, okay? We are not trying to cook a book, okay? Code of practice. So what are stated here in the code of practice? Are they mandatory? What do you think? If you find a requirement stated in the COP, the code of practice, is it a must to follow? Yes, please raise your hand. Yeah. Only one? Two? Only two, three, four? Okay. No, it's not a must to follow. Please raise your hand. Okay, many more. Okay, good. I'm not saying which of you are correct or which of you are wrong. Okay. Here, I would say there could be some gray area. Why? You will see very soon. Now, before we talk about the codes of practice, let me talk about something more, which is the national standards. Regulations often make reference to codes of practice and also national standards. Now, in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was a British colony, right? Very often you'll find that these documents will refer to national standards, which is the British standard, right? Because of the history, okay? But of course, in China, we have the GB, right? Guobiao, right? So Guobiao is the Chinese national standard, right? But still now you'll find many of our documents still refer to British standard. Why? Because as I said earlier, the system here was modeled on the English legal system, right? That was the history. Okay, right now, in any case, regulations usually just lay down the key principles. Technical details are here in COP or standards. They provide clear criteria and guidance for satisfying the regulatory requirements. In Hong Kong, provisions is made in many regulations empower the director of some government department to prescribe from time to time some COP, code of practice. So the purpose of COP, the code of practice, is to provide guidance, and sometimes is to make changes. Any suggestions? That lady, do you have any suggestion? Because you have been speaking again and again. I'm wondering whether you have any suggestion. Any? No? Okay, thank you. So from time to time, to maintain also the timeliness of the controls. So the example I've just quoted, this one. This is the latest edition, 2025. In the past, there are several old versions. Okay? This code of practice, this is the newest. So almost every few years, the requirements stated in this COP, some of them would have been updated, changes. Why? In this example is to maintain the timeliness of the controls. Okay? Here are some more examples. So if you look at this chapter 95, this regulation is 95B, Fire Service Installation Equipment Regulations. Regulation 10(1), it provides the director of FS, that means the head of the FSD, Fire Services Department, which has the power to prescribe a code of practice, COP, that governs the inspection and testing of fire service equipment. Okay, so this is one example. DFS has that power. Another example, FNIU, this is another ordinance, chapter 59. What is stated in this code of practice? It states compliance with the related code of practice does not of itself confer immunity from legal obligations. So that means what? If you comply with this code of practice, it doesn't mean that you are 100% free from legal liabilities. Okay? Although failure to observe any advice given in this code is not an offense, it doesn't mean that, say, if you don't follow it, it doesn't mean that you are committing an offense. But if you fail to comply with it, your failure to comply with it may be taken into consideration in criminal proceedings as a relevant factor to determine whether or not you have breached the provisions of the regulations. Now, this is the law. Okay? So in some cases, you are not entirely required to follow certain requirements, right? But if you fail to follow the requirements, in case you are charged when it comes to legal proceedings, your failure to comply with it will be considered to determine whether you are liable. Understand? Okay. So these are some points that people really need to observe. And going back to this kind of code of practice, when you read this kind of code of practice, this is just one example. We have many more code of practice. You have to read very carefully the initial part, because some of them may state that, oh, these are just recommendations. Okay? Recommendations, meaning what? You are recommended to follow them. Right? Some of them may not tell you have to, you must follow them. Okay? You are recommended to follow is different from you must follow. Right? But sometimes if you do not follow, right, it is not an offense. But if you fail to follow in case there are problems, then your failure to follow will be considered to decide whether, say, you are guilty or not. Understand? This is something that not all people understand. But these kind of wordings could also vary from one code of practice to another code of practice. Need to be very careful. Okay? You can compare. I mean, say this is for electricity wiring regulation. You can compare it with another code of practice, like, okay. For example, this is another one. Code of practice for fire safety in buildings. You can check the forward or the introduction and then compare between the two, right? Whether what is stated in these two booklets in the initial part are the same or different. Usually are different. Okay, so that's why it's important to really read them very carefully. Okay, what are functions of law? What do they do? There could be different functions for different laws. For example, one function is to control human behavior. Say we have the smoking public health ordinance. It prohibits people from smoking in certain areas. So it controls human behavior, right? Another example, sex discrimination ordinance protects, promotes social values, attitudes, okay? This is another kind of function of law. One more example is companies ordinance. It governs business activities. And for example, another one, say intellectual property law. Say it protects business interests and property, copyright, trademarks, goodwill, that sort of things. And we also have what employment ordinance. Say if you are working for a company, actually you are protected by this ordinance as an employee under the employment ordinance. Because what? This ordinance regulates the relationship between your employer and yourself as an employee to protect your benefits. Okay. So you can see here, these are 5 examples of the functions of law: human behavior, social values, business activities, interests, and property relationship. So if I ask you to quote another example, one more function of law, what do you think? One simple example, like if you refer to the Fire Service Ordinance, it is what? The function of the Fire Service Ordinance is to what? Say the Fire Services Ordinance, of course, is to protect, is to ensure fire safety, right? For safety purpose. So that is another function of law. So these 5 functions here, none of them covers safety, right? But in studying facility management, you will come across many of the laws. One purpose is to ensure safety. Another function, I can call you one more example, is about, say, some environmental law, is to protect the environment, right? Say air pollution control, water pollution control, right? That is to protect our environment. That is another example of function of laws. although they are not stated here. Right? Okay, sources. What are the sources of law and their hierarchy? So in Hong Kong, we actually have the constitutional law in place, which is the basic law. Then we also have the legislation, statute law. Legislations, meaning the ordinances, regulations, those are all under this umbrella, legislation, or what we call statute. Now, this term, again, needs to be very careful. Statute. Statute. Okay, these are three words, three different words, similar spelling, but different meanings. So when you write, you need to be very careful. Statute, status, statute. Statute here, now we are concerning this one, the first one, statute. So you can regard it as something which is in written form. Written. Laws in written form. Written. That means the written law. Like the ordinances, the regulations, they are statutes or statute laws. Okay? So this term is different from status, statute, right? Totally different. Okay? So be careful. Okay? When you write statute. Okay, then we also have common law and equity, right? I hope you still remember the diagram I showed you earlier, this one. Common law, equity, okay? Statute is here, legislation, statute, okay? Common law and equity, and then after that, we have the Chinese customary law and also the PRC national laws applying to Hong Kong. So better understand by referring to this hierarchy. The highest, Chinese constitution, okay, here, which is the top. Then the basic law enacted by the MPC in terms of power, authority, okay? This is the second one. The basic law of the Hong Kong here, and also the laws enacted by the Standing Committee of the MPC. Okay, so we have at least these 3 different levels, and then any more under these 3 levels. Number 4, we have the ordinances in Hong Kong enacted by the SAR legislature. And then we have law, actually the ordinances and its subsidiary legislation. Okay. So the main, I would say many of you will refer to this part as if it is the main body of laws in Hong Kong. But in fact, we have something more above. Okay. But in terms of requirement, technical requirements, you more refer to this legislation and also their code of practice, COP, right? Somewhere here. But besides statutes, okay, statutes, we also need to refer to decisional law, because the decisional law would tell you some rules of equity and also common law principles. Now, for this part, I will show you some example very soon. The final one, the lowest level, it is the Chinese customary law. Okay, Chinese customary law. Okay, now I will go back to explaining them to you one by one. Okay, the first one, basic law, enacted by NPC of the PRC, is actually the Mealy Constitution of Hong Kong, Mealy one, right? Because the big one applies to the whole of China, but here we just have the basic law, which is a Mealy one. Okay, basic law is the supreme law. That means at the highest level in Hong Kong, as long as Hong Kong is concerned. Okay, and it prevails over other laws in case you find some conflict or contradiction between the basic law and, for example, the ordinance. Ordinance at the lower level, basic law is here, right? In case there's difference, discrepancy between the two, then basic law prevails because it is at a high level. Understand? That's the meaning. Okay, prevails over other laws. So any existing laws or those previously enforced are invalid to the extent they are inconsistent. So as I said, if they are different, not consistent with the basic law, then we will refer to the basic law. Okay. So the basic law enshrined in this legal document are the important concepts. I believe many of Hong Kong people have heard about this term, these statements in Chinese Cantonese terms, right? One country, two systems, right? High degree of autonomy and also Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, right? So we won't have somebody coming from, say, the Europe to come here to rule Hong Kong, right? Like our chief executive is from Hong Kong, right? So Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. High degree of autonomy, high degree. So what is high degree? Like high degree of freedom, autonomy. So high degree doesn't mean that entire. It doesn't mean 100%. But what is high? 80% is high, 85 or 90 or 95. No one could tell, right? But that is a concept that it should be high, right? But it should not be entirely 100%, okay? One country, two system. Of course, we have China as one country. Two system, we have this system here in Hong Kong. We also have the system in mainland. Two different systems. So the legal system is a very good example. The English common law system here in Hong Kong is different from the legal system in mainland China, right? We have two different systems. So if you're interested, you can click this link to have a look at the basic law, okay? So different chapters of the basic law, and there are different articles. Article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on, okay? 9 chapters, 160 articles. And among these articles, some of them are relatively more relevant and important here. Article 8, the law, it states that laws previously enforced, that means before 1997, that is what? Those common law, rules of equity, ordinances, subordinate legislation, customary law shall be maintained after 1997. That means now we still are having these common law, rules of equity, and so on. Okay, no change, except for those contravene this law, contravene this basic law, and subject to amendment by the legislature. Okay, this is one very important article. And now Article 18, the law, it states that the laws enforced in Hong Kong shall be this law, meaning this basic law. And the laws previously enforced, that means those previously enforced before 1997, provided for in Article 8, and the laws enacted by the legislature, that means enacted by the Legislative Council. We have new laws enacted by the Legislative Council, right, from time to time, okay? National laws shall be applied in Hong Kong except for those in Annex 3. So you can take a look, what are those in Annex 3 of the Basic Law. So the laws here apply locally by way of promulgation and or legislation, announcement, promulgation. Okay. So PRC national law. Now is this another one? Okay. Basic law. We have the Chinese Constitution, laws enacted by the NPC. National laws. So Hong Kong is part of China, although we have the one country, two system, and it's important to have the PRC national law, a certain part of this law applicable here because we have our nationality and we have defense, military defense. So the recent news, as you can see from around the world, you can see how important it is to have strong enough defense. Right, the case of Venezuela, right? Have you heard about that in the South America, right? So if the country does not have strong defense, it could be easily overtaken, right? Foreign affairs is also one very important area allowing this national law applicable here. Okay, then legislation. As I said, statute laws, including ordinances, regulations, those are in written form. So statutes, written laws, okay? Documented, okay? Ordinances, subsidiary legislation. Prevail over common law in case of conflict between them. So go back to this hierarchy. Ordinances, subsidiary legislations are at a higher level than the common law, right? In case of conflict between them, these ordinances, subsidiary legislation prevail. Okay? And legislation often enacted to change the existing common law rules. So we need to have some changes in case in the legal requirements, then we will enact maybe a new law, okay? A new legislation, new ordinance. Can also create laws to cover an area not yet covered. Okay, if I ask you to think about any ordinance that you can think about was created, was enacted to change some existing common law rules. Any idea? Now, first, you need to understand what are the existing, could you quote one example of an existing common law rule? Then you have to think about, has that existing common law rule been changed? If yes, is it covered by a newly enacted ordinance? Right? If you have these answers to these three questions, then you can give me one example, right? So that is not an easy question. At this stage, this is just the first lecture, right? But later on, I hope you will be able to answer this. Another easier question, I would say, is the second one here. Law created to cover an area not yet covered. Now, assuming we don't talk about common law rules, just to quote, think about any laws created to cover an area not yet covered. Not long ago, some years ago. Okay, this ordinance, BEEO, right, is one example of legislation, Chapter 610, was first came into full implementation in 2012, right? 2012, to require compliance with the code of practice, blah, 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 okay? That means what? Before this date, there was no such ordinance. That means buildings energy efficiency covered by this ordinance was not covered before this date, right? So that was, I would say, at that time, a newly enacted ordinance. Okay? Okay. So requirements, I mean, statutory requirements would change from time to time. As time goes by, we find that we need to have some sort of controls. Then maybe the government will think about introducing a new ordinance. Okay. This is just one example. All right. Before that, we didn't have that ordinance. Ordinance, those are laws passed by Legislative Council, then assented to by the CE, Chief Executive. Ordinance empowers the CE or other bodies to issue detailed rules, regulations, and bylaws. They are all collectively called subsidiary legislation. So subsidiary legislations sometimes is called subordinate or delegated legislation. Same thing, okay? Just sometimes you come across different terms. They fill in the minor details of the parent ordinance. As I said, we have the chapter 123, then we have chapter 123A, 123B, 123C, and so on. 123 is the parent, 123A, B, C, D, and so on are the regulations or subsidiary legislation. Okay, we have common law and equity. Going back to this diagram. Common law, equity. They are regarded as decisional law, right? Decisional law, go back to the diagram. Decisional law, two branches, common law, equity. So they are from decisional law, another term is case law. Case law, okay. What is case law? Okay, this is one example. This is a case law. This is a law report. This report is about what? It is about a dispute, and that dispute is about personal injuries. Some people injured, hurt, okay? So the plaintiff, the guy who is lodging this complaint is Chen Cheng-yok in this case, and the respondent or the defendant is an elevator company. Okay, I believe many of you have heard about this company name, right? Lots of elevators are from this company, right? We have some others as well. Okay, so there's trial in the court, right? And then this report shows you the judgment. Okay, this is a report. And usually the initial part of the report will have the introduction, talking about the background of the case, what happened, where it happened, and so on. When it happened, something like that, okay? Then the issues in dispute. So what are the arguments, the problems, and so on, okay? How the accident happened, what are the supporting materials, evidence, and then what did the defendant say, arguing that, oh, it is not my responsibility, and so on, okay? Then we have the conclusion made by the judge, deciding which party should win, okay? Maybe the plaintiff, maybe the defendant, okay? It depends, right? Then this is one example of law report. And this is part of the case law here. So every year we have tons of such reports, many, okay? And from this report, reading this report, you would understand the common law principles and sometimes the rules of equity, because the law report would tell you, okay? So that's why in this subject, you are expected to read some of these law reports in relation to facility management. The example I've just shown you is related to facility management. Because what? Because when you manage a lift and elevator, in case the elevator causing somebody injured, okay, then you need to understand what are those common law principles and sometimes whether equities was applied, okay? So that's why it's important to read these law reports. Then you may ask, what law reports to read? No hurry. I will tell you what to read, okay? But you would expect that just one law report is talking about, say, this one is 24 pages, 6,000 words, 6,100, and you will be required to read more than one, okay? I will select some for you to read for at least for your seminar project. You need to read some law reports and then do some analysis and then present your findings. Okay? And in the past, I also set exam questions based on some law reports. You can, as I said earlier, you should download some past exam papers to read what was set in the past. You will find some questions were set based on some law reports. Okay? And in order to help you, in the coming activities, in-class activities, I will guide you to do some search and reading of such law reports. By reading such law reports, you will be able to understand the common law principles better. Okay, because some of them may not be easy to some newcomer to this legal area. That's why you need to start reading them, try to understand them. Okay, this is the example. So common law, a bit about the history, developed by the Common Law Courts of England. Some people would wonder why it is called common law, because it's simply because it was developed by the Common Law Courts of England centuries ago, many, many years ago. Derived from custom and judicial precedents. Okay. Precedent meaning, anyone knows? Past cases, like those from the law reports, past cases, precedents. They are called common law because it is commonly applied to all regions in England. That's why it's called common law. Rules of equity, based on judicial assessment of fairness. It was developed by the Court of Chancery, okay, many, many years ago. It was introduced to complement, you know, what is complement? It's not supplement, but complement. Common law, particularly useful in providing remedies not available at common law, is to help. Allows courts to use their discretion. Now this could be good, could be bad, because it could cover some remedies not available at common law, but because the courts can use them at their discretion. Discretion meaning what? The courts can decide. So sometimes the judgment could be variable. Why it is applied in this case but not applied in another case? Because at the discretion of the courts. So it's flexible, but it's not perfect. So the common law courts and the Court of Chancery coexisted until 1870s, long time ago. In Hong Kong, the Supreme Court Ordinance, later called the High Court Ordinance, enacted in around that time, 1873, empowers Hong Kong courts to apply both common law principles and rules of equity, both of them. But in case of clash between them, equity prevails. Equity at a higher level than common law. Okay? That's why equity prevails in case they are in conflict. All right? Okay, it's also time to have a break. Then I'll move on to talk about Chinese customary law. Now, in case you find some of the words that I've just talked about, you don't understand the meaning, you are recommended to take a look at some law dictionary, okay, or online law dictionary. Okay, let's take a short break. I will then go with you the final subsection.